A river pours out of darkness. Glacial sediment, 10,000 years compressed into silt. Somewhere beneath the surface of the lower Ohio, a flathead catfish the size of a man's leg holds in the lee of a submerged log, jaws open to the current. A mile upstream, a smallmouth bass rockets from a gravel bed after a fleeing crawfish. And 1,000 miles south, where the great river empties into the Gulf, the water carries the memory of everything it has touched, 31 states, 7,000 tributaries, and 4 centuries of a nation learning to fish. The Mississippi River Basin. 1,245,000 square miles of watershed, roughly 40% of the continental United States. From the Rocky Mountains to the Appalachians, from the Canadian border to the Gulf of Mexico, every raindrop that falls across 31 states eventually finds its way into this single, colossal drainage. The Mississippi itself begins as a stream narrow enough to step across, at Lake Itasca in northern Minnesota, then travels 2,350 miles south to its delta in Louisiana. But the Mississippi is not one river. It is a network, the Missouri reaching west toward Montana, the Ohio sweeping down from Pittsburgh, the Tennessee and Cumberland carving through Appalachian foothills, the Arkansas and Red Rivers draining the southern plains. Together they form the 4th largest watershed on Earth. And within this vast hydrological machine lives one of the richest assemblages of freshwater fish anywhere in the temperate world. Roughly 375 species inhabit the Mississippi Basin, more than any other river system in the northern hemisphere outside the Yangtze. Among them are ancient relics like paddlefish and long-nosed gar, species whose lineages stretch back 100 million years. But for the millions of Americans who cast lines into these waters each year, the draw is something else entirely. The predators. Largemouth and smallmouth bass, walleye and sauger, channel catfish and flathead catfish, northern pike and white bass, gamefish that built an industry, shaped communities, and turned a regional pastime into the most popular form of recreational fishing on the continent. This is the story of those waters and those fish, how a river basin the size of a subcontinent became the cradle of American sport fishing, and what it will take to keep it alive. Hello my friends, welcome to American Fishing Atlas. Subscribe to the channel, share and like. Thank you. To understand why the Mississippi Basin became the heartland of American fishing, start with the land itself. The basin's geological story is one of ice and time. During the Pleistocene, massive glaciers carved the upper Midwest, gouging out lake beds, rerouting rivers, and depositing hundreds of feet of fertile sediment across what is now the Mississippi Valley. When the ice retreated, it left behind a landscape uniquely suited to aquatic life: shallow floodplain lakes, braided side channels, vast backwater marshes, and gravel-bottom tributaries fed by cold, clear springs. The upper Mississippi, from Minnesota down through Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois, flows through a series of 29 navigation pools created by locks and dams built during the 1930s. Each pool functions as its own ecosystem, with tailwaters, backwaters, wing dams, and sloughs that create an extraordinary diversity of habitat within a single river reach. The upper Mississippi alone harbors roughly 120 species of fish. Walleye and sauger patrol the tailwaters below the dams, feeding where current concentrates baitfish against concrete aprons. Largemouth bass hold in the quiet backwater lakes and sloughs, ambushing prey from the cover of flooded timber and emergent vegetation. Smallmouth bass favor the clearer tributaries and rocky main channel borders, where current meets structure. Northern pike lie in ambush along weed edges in the calmer backwaters, and crappie, both black and white, suspend around submerged brush piles by the tens of thousands, drawing ice anglers in winter and open water fishermen through the spring spawn. In a single navigation pool, an angler might encounter a dozen or more gamefish species without ever leaving sight of the dam. No lake in America offers that kind of diversity within such a compact reach of moving water. Move south and west, and the character changes. The Missouri River, the basin's longest tributary at over 2,300 miles, drains the Great Plains and feeds the main stem with heavy loads of sediment that earn the Mississippi its nickname, the Big Muddy. Yet even in turbid waters, channel catfish and flathead catfish thrive, reaching enormous sizes in the deep holes and undercut banks of the lower Missouri and middle Mississippi. A flathead catfish in these waters can exceed 80 pounds. Channel cats, more abundant and more accessible, remain one of the most widely pursued species in the basin, caught on everything from commercial trout lines to a child's first hook baited with chicken liver. The Ohio River, entering from the east at Cairo, Illinois, contributes nearly as much flow as the Mississippi itself. Its tributaries, the Tennessee, the Cumberland, the Wabash, drain some of the most productive smallmouth bass water in the nation. The rocky, clear-flowing streams of the Ozark Highlands in Missouri and Arkansas hold smallmouth bass populations that rival any in America. Fish that grow heavy on a diet of crawfish and hellgrammites in cold, spring-fed creeks shaded by bluffs and hardwood forest. These Ozark streams connect, eventually, to the Mississippi, part of the same vast system, yet a world apart from the catfish flats of the lower river. And then, there is the largemouth bass, Micropterus salmons, the species that, more than any other, defines the Mississippi Basin's contribution to American fishing culture. Native to the Great Lakes and the Mississippi drainage, the largemouth evolved in the warm, vegetated waters of the basin's countless oxbow lakes, backwater sloughs, and reservoir shallows. It is a generalist predator, adapted to a stunning range of habitats, from farm ponds to sprawling reservoirs, from weedy bayous to suburban retention lakes. This adaptability, combined with an aggressive strike and a willingness to hit artificial lures, made the largemouth the foundation upon which an entire sporting industry would be built. Long before European contact, the waters of the Mississippi Basin sustained civilizations. The Mississippian culture, which flourished from roughly 800 to 1600 CE along the river and its tributaries, built one of the most complex societies in pre-Columbian North America. At its center stood Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, a city of perhaps 20,000 people, larger than London at the time, its great Monk's Mound covering 16 acres. The Mississippian peoples were farmers, but they were also fishers, and the two were never truly separate. The river and its backwaters provided catfish, drum, gar, and suckers, protein that sustained populations through seasons when crops were lean. Weirs and traps made from woven cane channeled fish into shallow water. Bone hooks, some small enough to target panfish, others large enough for catfish, have been recovered from archaeological sites across the valley. Dugout canoes, some more than 30 feet long, move people and goods along the same tributaries that modern bass boats now race across at 70 miles per hour. The river was not just a resource, it was the organizing principle of an entire civilization. European exploration brought new pressures and new traditions. French and Spanish fur traders plied the river system from the 1600s onward, and with westward expansion in the 1800s, the Mississippi became the spine of a growing nation. Commercial fishing intensified, catfish, sturgeon, and buffalo fish pulled from the river by the ton to feed growing cities along its banks. But recreational fishing, as Americans understand it today, was slow to develop. For much of the 19th century, sport fishing in the United States meant trout and salmon, cold-water species pursued with fly rods, the province of well-to-do Easterners. The warm-water game fish of the Mississippi Basin were considered rough, common, beneath the attention of the sporting press. That perception shifted slowly, then all at once. In the early 20th century, the construction of massive reservoirs across the basin, impoundments built for flood control, navigation, and hydropower, created vast new lakes that flooded timber and farmland, producing ideal largemouth bass habitat on a scale never seen before. Kentucky Lake, Lake of the Ozarks, Bull Shoals, Table Rock, Norris, Wheeler, these artificial impoundments, all within the Mississippi drainage, became proving grounds for a new kind of angling focused squarely on the Black Bass. Thousands of acres of standing timber, submerged roads, and drowned farmsteads created structure that largemouth bass colonized with astonishing speed. Within a generation, the South and Midwest had gone from backwater fishing country to the epicenter of a national obsession. Then came the moment that changed everything. In March 1967, a 33-year-old insurance salesman from Montgomery, Alabama, named Ray Scott found himself rained out of a fishing trip at Ross Barnett Reservoir near Jackson, Mississippi. Sitting in a motel room watching basketball on television, Scott had an idea that would reshape American fishing. 3 months later, on Beaver Lake in northwest Arkansas, he hosted the All-American Invitational Bass Tournament. 106 anglers, each paying $100 for the chance to compete. The winner, Stan Sloan of Nashville, weighed 37 pounds, 8 ounces over 3 days, and took home $2,000. It was the spark that lit a fire. By January 1968, Scott had founded the Bass Anglers Sportsman Society, BSS, and begun publishing Bassmaster magazine. The first Bassmaster Classic, Bass Fishing's World Championship, took place in 1971 at Lake Mead with just 24 competitors. Within a decade, BSS membership surpassed 600,000. The tournaments became proving grounds for innovation. New bass boats, outboard motors, sonar fish finders, and lure designs poured out of the industry to meet the demand of an exploding market. Johnny Morris, a Missouri tournament pro, saw the need for dedicated bass tackle and founded Bass Pro Shops. Forrest Wood, a White River guide, started building bass boats in his garage. The company became Ranger Boats. An entire economy, rooted in the waters of the Mississippi Basin, grew from a rainstorm and a television set. Perhaps Scott's most lasting contribution came in 1972, when he launched the "Don't Kill Your Catch" campaign, mandating aerated live wells in all BSS tournament boats, and introducing the catch-and-release ethic to competitive bass fishing. The idea was revolutionary for its time. Mississippi's game commissioner initially tried to block it, insisting released fish would spread disease. Scott prevailed. Today, more than 90% of bass anglers release all or most of the fish they catch. The bass itself became, as Scott put it, too valuable to be caught only once. That single shift, from harvest to conservation, transformed the relationship between angler and resource across the entire basin and beyond. To fish the Mississippi Basin today is to enter a landscape of almost incomprehensible scale and variety. A week spent on the upper Mississippi's backwater sloughs near La Crosse, Wisconsin, casting spinnerbaits into flooded willow and catching largemouth after largemouth in water so still it mirrors the sky, bears almost no resemblance to a morning spent drifting jigs through the tailwaters below Lock and Dam No. 2 near Hastings, Minnesota, where walleyes stack up in the turbulent current like commuters waiting for a train. Both are Mississippi River fishing. Both are separated by a few hundred miles and an entirely different set of skills. The basin's diversity demands adaptability. On the Ozark streams of southern Missouri, smallmouth bass fishing is an exercise in precision, light spinning tackle, 4-pound test line, small soft plastics or inline spinners presented to specific current seams behind boulders. The water runs clear enough to count the gravel on the bottom at 5 feet. A careless approach sends fish scattering. The reward for patience and stealth is a fish that fights with a fury that belies its size. A 2-pound Ozark smallmouth, hooked in fast water, will test lighter tackle as thoroughly as a bass twice its weight in still water. It is fishing stripped to its essentials, and for those who know it, nothing else quite compares. But move downstream, where those same Ozark creeks feed into the turbid main stem of the lower Mississippi, and the game shifts entirely. Here, flathead catfish anglers anchor heavy boats in the dark and fish live bluegill on circle hooks near undercut banks, waiting sometimes for hours for a single, violent strike that can peel 40 yards of line in seconds. The seasonal rhythms of the basin add another layer. Spring sends walleyes surging upstream below the dams, drawn by rising water temperatures and the ancient imperative to spawn. Anglers line the tailwaters by the dozens, vertical jigging with hair jigs or drifting minnows through the current breaks. By late spring, largemouth bass across the southern half of the basin move onto shallow flats to spawn, becoming aggressive and territorial, the prime window for sight fishing in the backwater lakes and reservoir coves. Summer pushes many species deeper, dispersing fish across the basin's vast, complex structure. Catfish feed most actively during the warm months, and tournament anglers on the big reservoirs within the drainage, places like Kentucky Lake, Pickwick, and the pool stages of the Middle Mississippi, probe offshore ledges and submerged creek channels with deep-diving crankbaits and football jigs. Fall may be the basin's finest hour. Cooling water temperatures trigger feeding frenzies across species lines. Largemouth and smallmouth bass chase shad into the shallows. Walleye go on extended feeding binges before winter. White bass school in the tributaries, by the thousands, striking anything that moves. On the Middle Mississippi, from roughly St. Louis to Memphis, autumn brings a convergence of species and opportunity that few river systems on Earth can match. Catfish, bass, sauger, drum, and crappie all feeding aggressively in the same stretch of water, accessible from the same boat on the same afternoon. The river seems to compress itself, pushing life into every available channel and backwater, as if storing energy against the coming ice. For anglers who know the water, October on the Mississippi is not a month. It is a season unto itself. The economic weight of all this fishing is staggering. The Mississippi River and its associated waters generate an estimated $21 billion annually in recreation and tourism revenue. Bass fishing alone, driven by the tournament industry that grew from Scott's first event on Beaver Lake, accounts for an economic impact exceeding $125 billion nationwide, employing more than 800,000 people. These are not abstract figures. They represent bait shops in river towns, guide services on tributary lakes, boat dealerships along two-lane highways, and motel rooms booked solid every April in places most Americans have never heard of. The Mississippi Basin is under siege. The same engineering that created its great reservoirs and navigation pools has fundamentally altered its hydrology. More than 2,200 miles of levees line the river and its tributaries, disconnecting the main channel from the floodplain wetlands that once served as nursery habitat for countless species. Nutrient runoff from the agricultural heartland pours nitrogen and phosphorus downstream, feeding a hypoxic dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico that in recent years has exceeded 6,000 square miles, an area larger than Connecticut. Water quality in tributaries throughout the basin suffers from agricultural and industrial pollution, degrading the cold, clear streams that sustain species like smallmouth bass and walleye. And then there are the invaders. Invasive carp, bighead, silver, grass, and black were brought to the United States in the 1960s and 1970s for use in aquaculture systems and sewage treatment. They escaped into the Mississippi Basin and have since spread across much of the lower and central river system. Silver carp, in particular, have become infamous, voracious filter feeders that outcompete native species for plankton, reproduce at alarming rates, and leap from the water when disturbed by boat motors, posing a direct physical threat to anglers. Peer-reviewed research has linked established silver carp populations to measurable declines in native sport fish across the upper Mississippi River system. Federal and state agencies now coordinate the largest invasive species management effort in North American history, with more than $31 million allocated in fiscal year 2024 alone. Acoustic deterrent systems, commercial harvesting programs, and bioacoustic fish fences are being deployed at key choke points to prevent the carp from reaching the Great Lakes and the upper reaches of the basin. Yet the basin also demonstrates what is possible when the will exists. The catch-and-release ethic born from Ray Scott's movement in 1972 has fundamentally improved bass populations across the drainage. The Clean Water Act, which Scott and BSS actively lobbied for, has reversed the worst industrial pollution of the river's mid-20th century decline. The Sportfish Restoration Program, funded by excise taxes on fishing tackle under the Wallet-Brough Amendment, legislation Scott helped secure in 1984, generates more than $350 million annually for fisheries management, habitat restoration, and boating access. State agencies across 31 states now collaborate through organizations like the Mississippi Interstate Cooperative Resource Association, pooling resources and data to manage shared fisheries that recognize no state boundaries. The Mississippi Basin will never be what it was before the locks, the levees, and the fertilizer. No one alive remembers that river. But the basin remains, in its altered and imperfect state, the most productive freshwater fishery in temperate North America, a place where 375 species of fish persist, where smallmouth bass still rise to dry flies in Ozark Spring creeks, where flathead catfish still grow to sizes that test the limits of heavy tackle, and where the largemouth bass that launched a multi-billion-dollar industry still ambushes prey in the same backwater sloughs its ancestors have inhabited. Since the glaciers retreated, the question is not whether the basin can be saved. The question is whether the generation that inherited it will prove worthy of the one that fought to protect it, and of the waters themselves, which ask for nothing except the chance to keep flowing. Dawn on the Mississippi. Fog lifting off a backwater lake somewhere in the middle reach. A bass boat idles through the shallows, its wake barely disturbing the surface. Beneath the hull, in water colored the amber of old tea, by tannins leached from 1,000 miles of forest and field, a largemouth bass holds against a fallen log. The angler does not see it yet. But the river knows it is there. The river has always known.